sure. Huh? Is probably not a bad idea. We'll probably have to put it on a different computer. Can I have the... It was really, really good. It was really, really good. All right. Yeah. Well, you gave us the computer we're using now. We actually do need a second. Alan, I saw Alan and Michael's head pop up like little meerkats back there. What? Because we actually are short a computer back there. The weight that we're putting on the tower that you donated is more than it should be handling. And so we're talking about splitting the computer to one to run the in-house and the other to run the out-house. That sounds bad. But to run the two different channels. There's enough that goes on in here, screens and all that. We need another computer running the stuff, the streaming. I'm sure they will take you up on it. I'm sure they will. That would be awesome. That would be awesome, Brother Jim. All right, we were talking about banishing bitterness, and we had opened in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 15 through 17, which warned about any root of bitterness taking up a place in us and causing us to become bitter, and the real danger that's in bitterness. The little piece of the little quote that kind of goes along with it is that the root bears fruit. And so if we get bitter and we have a root of bitterness, be careful because that fruit will come out. And I was actually praying for a particular family this morning and I'm pretty certain that they're suffering from some bitterness among the parents. And I've noticed some things in some recent time. It's nobody here, but I've noticed some things recently where I'm seeing some things in their children, and I think what I'm seeing in their children is a result of some of the bitterness that the parents have, and there's starting to be some expression of anger in the children, and some expression of displacement and things that are showing up in the kids, and I believe that you can trace that back to some bitterness that's in the parent's life. The bitterness in the parent's life has caused disruption. It has caused some lifestyle change. It has caused a lot of different things there with that family, and now then you're seeing some things manifest also in the kids. The root bears fruit in the individual, but it also affects other people around us. If we're bitter, people around us can taste that. It'll affect around us. So a lot of times, though, with our bitterness, we are just pushing it down. We have a hurt, and instead of dealing with it, we push it down, and we wound up burying it. But it's not like burying a dead body. We're burying a seed. We're burying a root. And when you do that, then it's going to take root. It's going to bear fruit, and that's going to be not healthy. Instead, what you have to do is you have to root it out. Dig it out, not bury it down. So one of the first things that we saw to try to deal with that is that we need to give grace. We give grace, and we give of the grace that we've received. Ephesians 4:32 told us that we ought to forgive. Our forgiveness should be immediate. Our forgiveness, according to Hebrews 10:17, also ought to be permanent. And that's not to say that we won't ever think about people that we need to forgive again. We won't ever recall the instance that we have to forgive. But our permanent forgiveness is that we forgive over and over again. And so that you're not going to get to the place where you can forgive and forget. We have no commandment like that in Scripture. It doesn't exist. But that we should be in a position to constantly forgive. That is in Scripture. Forgiveness then is our releasing of our right to retaliation. We whenever we are hurt, we feel that we have a right to retaliate. And but when we forgive, we relinquish that right. We say, no, I'm going to give up that right to retaliate. And we also forbear. Ephesians 4:2, it tells us about forbearing one another. And this is to choose not to take action. We might even have a right to take action. It might not only be a perceived justice, but it might be even a legal justice to say that we could take some sort of retaliation, but we forbear because we are choosing not to take action. Forgiving and forbearing both are an action. It is addressing action. It is not permitting, it is not saying that the action, that the injustice, the harm that was perpetrated against us was right. It is not saying that it was acceptable. It is not approving of a harm. But forgiveness is acknowledging it and dealing with it. That is not approving. Jesus did not approve of the sins that were being committed against him on the cross. He did not say, yep, perfectly fine to rip out a guy's beard, spit on a guy, betray his friendship, nail him to a cross, beat him with a whip. He did not say all of that was okay. He did not. He did not say that the anger, hatred, that those sins were okay. He did not change the law to make all of that permissible, but he did forgive them. See the difference? Sometimes we withhold forgiveness because we believe that granting forgiveness would be to make acceptable the thing that was committed against us. That's not the case. So long as we harbor unforgiveness in our heart, in fact, what's happening is we are allowing the hurt that happened to us to continually be perpetrated against us. A lot of times we're hurt by someone passing by. They hurt us one time, and oftentimes they don't know, and they do not even think about it again, but it really hurt us, and we continue to dwell on it. So then we continue to be abused by that hurt. Meanwhile, the perpetrator has moved on, and they've never thought about it again. So then when we harbor that, then all that's happening is we are continually being hurt and harboring this resistance. Meanwhile, we're the only one feeling it. Okay? Now, that's not to say that's every case. Oftentimes, there are people that do a hurt, that do a harm, and they're glad they did the hurt. They did it on purpose or thoughtfully. But either case, forgiving them does not permit that, doesn't make it okay. It should be addressed. Jesus in Matthew 18 said that offenses would come, but he did not permit them. He did not say that they were okay. In fact, he said that if you were to hurt a young one, that would be addressed, and it would be better if human court were to say, take that person and tie a rock around their neck and toss them in the water and drown them, than to have to deal with what God has planned for them. Because what God has planned for them is worse. His retribution is worse. Okay? So that was supposed to be addressed. It is always right to address hurts. It's always right to address harms. But then we make a decision about how we'll do with that. Do we forgive? Do we forbear? There's also, are there consequences? We also can see sometimes 1 Corinthians, for example, there was a person that was doing some wrong things, and there needed to be consequences meted out. There are some consequences that can be meted out by the church. There are some consequences that should be meted out only by a civil government. We are not authorized to become vigilantes, although we want to be. We're not authorized to do that. Sometimes I kind of wish for the old days. You know, you had a guy beating his wife or something like that. He would come home and there would be a bundle of switches or canes on the porch. In other words, stop. If he beat her again, then the guys in the neighborhood, the guys in the town would take those canes and beat the daylights out of him with them. And I kind of sometimes think that might have been better justice system than we have right now. But nevertheless, we're not authorized to do that. But we do have folks that are, and so it's right to use those things to address the things that can be done. We're not talking about a Spanish Inquisition. That wasn't what happened, and I know you guys all went right away to Monty Python. But but it was a but we can set someone aside from church membership. We can say no, that's not okay. We can say that this is unacceptable behavior. We can say that as a church, and that's right to do. But in 2 Corinthians, what happened? The guy corrected the problem. It was a correctable problem, and he was able to be forgiven. Some problems, by the way, are not going to be able to be corrected, like just saying I'm sorry. There are some cases, and there are some situations where people can be forgiven, maybe by this church, but because of their actions, because of their character, they're not going to be allowed back into assembly with the church. It will never happen. That doesn't mean that we haven't forgiven them. That means we're protecting the rest of the people that are in the church. Hopefully that's clear enough without just coloring the coloring book in. Yes, Brother David.
Can you explain what love keeping a record of wrong looks like?
Love keeping a record of wrong.
Is that God's perspective, not man's?
Help me a little bit to understand the statement. Are you saying that love does keep a record of wrong?
No, it doesn't. So
1 Corinthians
what does that
13.
look like to us?
Yeah. Yeah, so what'll often happen, let's think about it in a marriage, and then we'll apply it to the church. In a marriage, what happened is we simply say we're keeping score, okay? I'll use a real life example that my wife will not appreciate. When we were first married, I had a radio flyer, pull behind yourself wagon. It was the wagon that I used. So I told you, she's leaving. It took me a while, so you'll understand the story in a minute. But it was my wagon that I would set in and roll down hills. I had it for all my life. Grandmother gave it to me. It was just like a thing, okay? So when we got married, that was one of the things that came with me into the marriage to the next house. She ran over it and munched it. It was gone. It's a goner. Totaled it. So I was very angry about that, and so we had to work through things. We're sometimes going to break each other's stuff. Okay, it's just so we have to work through that. Now, you might not tell since I was able to recall this so quickly, but now if we're having a fight and she there's another similar thing, something else gets broken or something else gets lost, and if my first thing is, you broke my wagon and you don't respect my stuff, and I bring that back, even though I've told her years ago, decades ago, I forgave you, I'm sorry, that this happened, I forgave you, but if I continue to bring that back up, now I'm keeping a record of wrong. I'm wrong if I bring up the wagon. Okay, I should never be able to bring it up again. It's off limits. Now, that is using a simple, silly, material record of wrong. There are, as we know, other not so silly records of wrong. And what can happen is if we get past a point and we say, okay, we've forgiven, we fought this out, we settled this matter, it's over, and now then we get to our next fight, and we bring it up again, we're keeping a record of wrong. We're not doing what 1 Corinthians 13 says that love does. In a church, it could look like that. So in 1 Corinthians, the man there, what he was doing was he was having adulterous fornication with his father's wife, who apparently was not his mother, okay? And Paul's like, this is gross stuff. Gentiles don't even do this, and you're doing this in the church. This is weird, nasty stuff, and it's public knowledge. It wasn't like a secret thing, like everybody in town knew it. It was like this public thing that this is what was going on. Like Joe says, the Bible's not G-rated. Not even the New Testament. The Bible's pretty hardcore, like a lot of the stuff that goes on in here. So Paul's like, this is going on. You got this guy in your church, and you're acting like nothing's going on about it, like nothing ever happened. But this has to be dealt with. You can't allow this. So he has to be taken out of membership of the church. And so, so they do. They take him out of membership of the church. Whatever happens in the guy's life, he gets it right. Leaves her, or whatever was the case, however he corrected it, he corrects it. He comes back to the church and wants to be back in membership in the church again. And the church in 2 Corinthians is saying, no, you can't come back. And Paul's like, no, you can't tell him he can't come back. He's got it fixed. You did the discipline. You have to now allow the return. So that would be keeping a record of saying, like, no, we're not going to let you back because of all the stuff that you did wrong. Some of us have been members of the same church who would, at times, whenever someone misstepped, would have to go stand before the church and give a laundry list of all the stuff that they ever did wrong. And if they didn't come, it was ridiculous. And then we'd go to these 4-hour business meetings, and people would, and I'm not exaggerating, am I? Like 4-hour business meetings, and people would bring up stuff from the times before when the person did something else. They're keeping a record. And then they wonder how come they've always struggled to grow and why they don't have any new blood. Anyway, God love them. Okay, so it's very similar. Yeah. They did. So, ridiculous level of governmental interaction. So, that's keeping a record of wrong. All right. Let me just, without putting too fine a point on it, say, so we have told registered sex offenders that they are not allowed to come to general service at the Lighthouse. We will not allow that. That does not mean that we haven't forgiven them, but it is going to, what it does is it puts the rest of the people, and potentially their victims at risk in this building. We won't allow that. Now, can we forgive them? 100%. We can forgive them. Will we create other opportunities for them? Yep, 100%. We will find different ways to minister to them and help them, but not sitting in this general assembly. Here's what could happen. I was talking to, brought up Mormon, I was talking to a person from LDS, and just on a side note, and they're like, well, if they had an SO that was going to be at services, they have to go through all this big hierarchical thing, but they can be allowed to come back and be in their services. But if they're in their services, then they are at a chaperone's hip all the time. And I see what they're doing there. But here's the danger. Here's another person, potential victim, another woman, another child, another little boy or whatever is the case. Here's another potential victim. They don't know that individual, the SO, is an SO, and they don't know that the chaperone is a chaperone. They don't know anything about that situation. But they see the person at Walmart, not chaperone. Oh, this must be a safe person. I saw them at church. See? Now then, we can create a possible victimhood situation. So that's why it will not, while everyone is a sheep, we're also shepherds, okay? And so we've got to protect those. So I don't believe that that's keeping necessarily a record of wrong. We don't pretend like nothing ever happened, because there are consequences for certain things. This is the one that we use a lot of times for forgiveness. Like a woman gets pregnant out of wedlock, she has the child, she gets forgiveness from God, family, and all this sort of stuff, okay, messed up, well, they're still a child. There's still consequences. But those consequences can become beautiful. Those consequences can become a thing of treasure. So a person messes up, they're not allowed to come into the general services, all right? But now then what that does is if they will truly follow Christ, it can create a whole nother opportunity. Because don't you know that there's a community of SOs out here that also need Christ? And so that's that, but they're what's going to make them, how are you going to reach them? It's going to look different. But we still love them, we still care about them, but there's a different approach. Leper colony, same thing. Leper, active, contagious leper, get saved. You don't just bring them into the church building. Okay, you have a service at the leper colony. People who are like that because it's contagious. That makes sense. So, yeah, it's tough and imperfect. I hope that answers your question. I hope it's satisfactory. Yeah, Brother Joe.
It's the fact that our love, flesh, human, is nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a compromise on circumstance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that we're not going to forget.
Right.
I can forget a bit or whatever, but that doesn't mean I'm going to forget next time. Or if it's not him, it's something else, and it's going to harm me the same way. It's like, I remember that, right?
Or you can say, you know, before anything.
When that return, though, when that happens, or the cause for straighten up for correction, we have to go back through that and forgive again to have a right approach, because that memory does come back, and so now then that's an opportunity, because we haven't forgot, we can't do it. We forgive again. That's why Galatians 6 says, "Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, you which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted." Okay, so there's that opportunity. We have to forgive, we have to help and minister, but we also have to remember that we are subject and suspect to be able to fall. But then we could also have bitterness, we could also have unforgiveness, we could also have these things in our heart, so we have to approach that with the right spirit. Absolutely.
In a way that might be appropriate and the sin.
Couldn't say it better. Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah. All right. Sorry for this repeat here. It kind of went a little bit more. Let's look at Romans chapter 12. And we haven't really got to our subject. Look at this spider. I am not going to forgive him. You weren't going to tell me the brown recluse was about to...
You said what?
Romans 12. Romans 12, and let's go down to verse 19. Romans 12, by the way, is the chapter of character. So there's a lot of things in here that have to do with personal character. Look, verse 19. "Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good." Our response to offense, rather than the offense, determines whether we will become bitter. That an offense happens doesn't make us bitter. How we respond to that offense, though, could make us bitter or not. And our best example of this is from the person of Joseph. We won't turn there for time this morning, but Genesis chapter 50 in verse 20. Joseph is talking to his brothers, remember, who have thrown him in a pit, faked his death, sold him into slavery. He goes from slavery to prison to slavery. He goes, now then he's at Pharaoh's right-hand side, and he's delivered Egypt and his family from death and starvation. And so his brothers are there. They're terrified because he rightly could have killed them. If he was bitter towards his family, he could have put them in prison. He could have withheld good from them. But it's apparent through Joseph's actions, although he rightfully, we would expect that he had hurt. We would expect that he had sorrow. We can see how he responded when he cried seeing his younger brother. We can see how he responded when he heard about his father's condition and that his father was still alive. He had to go away and hide because he was overcome with emotion. So we expect that he had all of the natural human responses that any one of us would have had, natural human emotions. But we can see that he's not bitter because in that passage there, Genesis 50, verse 20, he says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. So he kept having this right perspective about what God was doing. Maybe that's because he had a gift in understanding dreams. Maybe he could see God working some things out. No doubt when Pharaoh promotes him, his mind goes back to those dreams of his childhood when others are bowing before him. No doubt he's seeing the blessing of God on his life as he grew Potiphar's house, all these different things. He's seeing the blessings of God, but the hurt's still there. He could have become bitter over it, but he didn't. He saves his family, forgives his brothers. And so it's not the offense that happened to him that determined how he was going to be, but it was how he responded to that. He responded appropriately. Emotions were all still there. Your emotions are not wrong because you feel some way, because you're hurt, upset. That's not wrong. But then what you do in that case with that, your response, not necessarily your reaction, but your response, that's going to do something with how that you go, how that you be. Your first response when someone cuts you off is not God bless you. Okay? That your reaction is not God bless you. A guy almost hit me the other day. I didn't say a blessing word, but then my reaction though is and a bit of anger. But then my response, thankfully, at least on that day, was, thank God that didn't go worse. Moment of thankfulness and gratitude that it wasn't, didn't something. So response, so that we're not doing that. Now, there's a whole bunch of more to study, and we haven't even got to our main character study about bitterness, who is going to be Naomi, but we will eventually get there, I promise you, but we're out of time today. Any further question or comment? Yeah.
The story of Joseph reminded me recently. I heard Warren Day on one of her concerts in the song,
Mhm.
talking about how as a child she had like of actually being molested and stuff. She described him as like vision of premonition or whatever.
Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting.
Pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. A girl can sing, that's for sure. All right. We'll dismiss from this section and we'll be back.